This video is sponsored by CarnageCon. More about them later on. What's up, folks? Welcome back to TacticalTortoise. My name is Trevi, and it's time for another episode of the best armies in Warhammer 40k. I'm currently on the road, coming back from the Crucible 40k Major, a 150-player event that I live-streamed over the weekend. So if you want to see some cutting-edge competitive Warhammer 40k, go check out the live tab on my channel if you want to watch all of those games. The event featured all of the new rules updates that we saw released last week, and we had some incredibly tight games between some absolutely top-level opponents. So, highly recommend that you check out those VODs. But with that, we're going to hop into this week. Now we're seeing the most recent updates basically universally accepted over the vast majority of events this weekend. As far as I could tell, basically all of them used all of the new updates. And that's given us some really interesting results to discuss, including Space Marines back on top with their new Shadow Mark Talon detachment. We saw 4 total Space Marine event wins this weekend, 2 of them coming from Raven Guard, one at the Crucible GT that I live streamed, as well as at the GT Mallorca, as well as 2 from Blood Angels at the Hobby Henchman Autumn and Phoenix GT. Now, we'll talk about the specifics of those Raven Guard wins later on, but I think it's safe to say that this is going to be a staple army near the top of the metagame, assuming that it gets updated in ways that many events are already ruling that it will. World Eaters also coming down near the top here with 2 wins at the big major level Dunehammer Open, as well as the Icehammer GT. Now from there, we have a pretty wide variety of other factions from other events, including Necrons and Chaos Space Marines from the Phoenix GT, Chaos Knights from Grip Figurespiel 2, Aeldari from the Septembro Open, Death Guard from the Autumn Swordwind GT, Chaos Demons from NordCon with a list after my very own heart, Adepta Sororitas from the incredibly named Orchard of Oh No, and Adeptus Mechanicus from Invasion 2025. So let's hop into these lists just after a word from our sponsor. This video is sponsored by the Carnage Gaming Convention and its miniature gaming events presented by Drago Games. Held every year in Killington, Vermont in the month of October, the Carnage Gaming Convention is a long-running staple of New England tabletop gaming and features events for a dizzying variety of games, including board games, tabletop games, and of course miniature games, all hosted in a picturesque Vermont ski resort. So not only do you get to be surrounded by cool games, but also incredible vistas. Look at these vistas. Available at the event are going to be competitive events for Age of Sigmar, Warhammer 40,000, as well as a variety of other specialist games, including Mordheim, Kill Team, Star Wars Shatterpoint, and Bolt Action. Carnage 28 is occurring October 24th through 26th, 2025, so check out the link in the video description to get your tickets today. Now, we're going to start by talking about Raven Guard from the Crucible GT. This was won by Art of War's own John Lennon, who has won this event the past 4 years running. What an absolute champion. Now, the reason that I mentioned before that there is some errata required to Raven Guard, and the event did choose to house rule these rules, is that, unfortunately, the new Space Marine stuff, including the new Shadow Mark Talon Raven Guard detachment, did release in kind of a state of disrepair. Unfortunately, the way that the rules work currently, playing the detachment actually excludes you from getting the enhanced Oath of Moment that Codex compliant chapters will get you, since it's not included in the list of Space Marine detachments that grant you that Oath of Moment bonus. However, the assumption is that it will be added to that at some point in the future. In addition, Ethan Sean has a bizarrely worded ability where he targets a unit and then forces all of his friendlies within 12 inches that declare a charge to charge that unit, however gives them charge rerolls. That, of course, can create some annoying situations where your army just fails a bunch of charges because now it's forced to dual charge if you ever choose a relevant target for it. I assume that will also be errated to only grant a charge reroll if you declare his target as the target of a charge, and that is how the event chose to house rule this ability. However, as written, it has the potential to totally mess up your charge phase. That said, if Raven Guard do receive these erratas and do end up being played at that full level of power, this detachment's going to be absolutely insane. The reason for that is that it is essentially a strictly superior version of the Vanguard Spearhead detachment. The difference is being that it has an onboard reactive move, which is incredibly flexible, flexible. It has access to advance and charge on a variety of units, including Caven Shrike's Vanguard Veteran unit, because he will grant the unit access to the Phobos keyword, which allows it to advance and charge. And it also has an enormous amount of maneuverability and flexibility, all at being very efficient from a command point standpoint. Aethan Sean gives you access to its up-down reposition stratagem for free, and you can use other similar repositional stratagems like Rapid Ingress off of your captains for free as well. Not to mention the fact that Caven Strike also duplicates the effect with his own ability, also for free. So the army's able to do an absolute immense amount of action without having to spend any command points whatsoever, allowing you to spend those command points on rerolls and more offensive stratagems, or holding up reactions like counterattacks and reactive moves. Now, in this particular list, John Lennon was running Aethan Sean as well as Caven Shrike, a jump pack captain with Hunter's Instincts, as well as a combi weapon lieutenant with the Coronal Susurrant to give him a Lord of Deceit aura. Now, the big thing here is that Hunter's Instinct enhancement. It's one of the most powerful enhancements in the game and allows the unit to treat the battle round as being one later for the purposes of setting up on the battlefield. That allows him to deep strike or rapid ingress on the top of the first turn, meaning that you must begin the game by screening out the rapid ingress. Otherwise, this jump pack captain is simply going to place all his models behind a building 12 inches away from you, move 12 inches, shoot, and then charge you, and probably kill a bunch of stuff, losing you the game. In addition to this, we're also taking an Intercessor squad, some utility in the form of 2 to 5-man jump pack assault Intercessor squads that gain bonus OC thanks to Caven Shrike's inclusion. We have 2 Centurion Devastator squads, a 6-model unit with missile launchers and las cannons, as well as a similarly equipped 3-model unit. The big benefit here is that the 6-model unit obviously is extremely good when going into reserve and then coming off a table edge. You can also use the detachment stratagem for +1 to hit and +1 AP to supercharge their attacks, especially given the fact that Centurion Devastators get reroll 1s to hit permanently. They get full hit rerolls if they target an enemy on an objective. However, that +1 ballistic scale from the stratagem is very powerful. It allows them to hit on 2s, rerolling 1s, then gain full rerolls on their las cannon shots because they are twin linked. We then have a bunch of Inceptors. That's 12 total Inceptors, a unit of 6 with plasma, as well as 2 units of 3 with assault bolters. Now, the 6 with plasma are important because the downside of the Centurion Devastators is that they don't deep strike. So if you are keeping them on the table to begin with, they actually can't use the strategic reserve strat to enter reserve and then arrive at the bottom of the first round. So if you go first, you don't have many options to pick up a unit and then drop them off the table edge to shoot, because there's no legal position on turn 1 to arrive off a table edge of strat reserve. You need deep strike in order to be able to use that combination on the bottom of the first turn, which is why a big Inceptor squad is useful. Now, in addition, this army is also extremely deep strike focused. It's going to play very aggressively. It's going to throw jump pack infantry in your face. So being able to combine the attacks from Centurion Devastators coming off the table edge with a bunch of Inceptors dropping at the same time or advancing up the table to shoot means that you will often overwhelm your opponent, and if you ever overcommit into this army, it's going to be able to kill a variety of targets. Now, from there, we also have 2 Vanguard Veteran squads, 1 with Inferno Pistols, 1 with Storm Shields. The Inferno Pistol unit is particularly powerful because you can use it alongside either Haven to give it advanced shoot and charge, or the free rapid ingress off of the jump pack captain, depending on the matchup. And the big benefit there is that you can oath the moment of target, assuming you're getting the +1 to wound. The Vanguard Veterans can drop near it, move 12 inches up to it, which will likely allow their Inferno Pistols to get to Melta range, and then fire 9 Melta shots with full hit rerolls and +1 to wound, wounding most vehicles on 3s or 4s, which is enough to kill most medium vehicles in the game, allowing the Vanguard Veterans to charge any transport occupants inside or other utility units to use their lower AP weapons against infantry, which is where they prefer to be. So this army is going to set up a situation where it's going to be either strat reserving or rapid ingressing both Vanguard Veterans and Inceptors or other units in the very early game, hitting you with multiple units at a time from the very start of the game, from turn 1. Then it's going to follow that up with Caven Shrike's unit, who can up down, threaten rapid ingresses from outside 12 inches, where his unit's entirely uninteractable from the opponent because it can't be shot at from outside 12 as long as Caven's leading it, and follow that up with a second unit of Vanguard Veterans alongside a bunch of Inceptors. It's extremely difficult to deal with. You have to screen very heavily on turn 1 if you are going second into it. And the downside there is that it has enough shooting between the Inceptors and the Centurion Devastators that it will simply be able to kill your screens in the first 3 turns of the game before bringing on its reserves towards the bottom of battle round 3. Meaning that even if you have enough screens to keep it at bay for long enough, it will likely just be able to sandpaper your army down in the course of the early game in order to open up up optimal drop zones for its jump back infantry later on. And honestly, many armies in the game don't have the capacity to screen this level of deep striking, especially since we're also talking about Inceptors that have a natural 6-inch deep strike as well. So the forward pressure of this list is absolutely incredible. And given the efficiency of most of these data sheets, it's difficult to do that while trading reasonably into your opponent, because it will outnumber a lot of other armies. As it turns out, fully infantry Space Marines can still bring a lot of models, and that's what we're seeing here. I'm interested to see the status that Raven Guard end up in after all of their abilities are finally resolved, and what the detachment actually looks like is finally worked out. Not to mention the fact that we are also getting new Space Marine releases in the future, but I do think this list is probably going to be a staple of the competitive metagame and is likely here to stay for a while. Now with that, we also saw some similar success from Blood Angels. Let's move over to the Hobby Henchman Autumn GT, which was won by Jordan Checkley running Angelic Inheritors. Very cool to see this detachment played after a absolute tirade of Liberator Assault Group, but Angelic Inheritors does give the army a lot more flexibility. While it doesn't have the raw damage output that Liberator Assault Group does, it does have things like potential army-wide fall back, shoot, and charge with Sanguinary Grace for all your character units, as well as a lot of rerolls from Carmine Wrath, giving you real ones to hit and wound again on your character units. Now, these character abilities are going to be unlocked by 2 jump pack captains. One of them has the Blazing Icon to ignore Overwatch. Commander Dante Lamartis, a combi weapon lieutenant with Ordained Sacrifice, giving him a respawn, making him very difficult to deal with. Not only does he have a reactive move, lone operative, stealth, but also if you commit into killing him, you may just not kill him and he'll continue to hold an objective, alongside the Sanguinor. Now, the Sanguinor does have special synergy with this detachment because you're able to put jump back units up into reserve with Unto Burning Skies, which the Sanguinor can do even if he is in engagement, which is cool, allowing him potentially to use his out of Deep Strike Heroic Intervention, fight first into a unit, and even if he doesn't kill it, pull back into reserve and either drop later or rapid ingress for a future threat. Obviously, he can't use his ability to drop into melee multiple times, but he can just use a normal rapid ingress to threaten objectives in the future. We then have 2 units of jump pack Assault Intercessors, 2 Ballistic Dreadnoughts for shooting, a jump pack Death Company squad with Lamartis, alongside a total of 12 Sanguinary Guard, 1 large unit of 6, as well as 2 units of 3. Generally speaking, I think we're going to be joining Dante into the big unit of 6, as well as the 2 smaller units in with Jump Pack Captains, who will give them their bonus strength. All of these guys rocking in Carmine Blades. We also then have a Scout Squad for utility. Now with that, we're going to keep on the theme of red armored Space Marines and talk about World Eaters, who took down the Dune Hammer Open with a Berserker Warband with Innes Wilson in the pilot seat. This army was running Karn the Betrayer, as well as a Slaughterbound with Berserker Glaive, making him an absolutely insane missile, giving him bonus attacks and damage, which will then stack with his already impressive melee profile when he uses his once per game Finest Hour ability. You can also attach him into a unit of Exalted 8-Bound with their new ability to gain +1 damage targeting vehicles, and that stacks additional damage on this guy, allowing him to get up to 11 4 damage melee attacks with devastating wounds, which is an insane level of damage output from a single character, although obviously it does require that you send another unit of 8-Bound with him. We then have a World Eater's Juggernaut Lord with Battle Lust to give him reroll charge rolls, or +1 to charge if you already have reroll charge rolls unlocked thanks to your Blessings of Khorne. A second Juggernaut Lord to improve the speed of Khorne Berserker squads, which compose the bulk of the army, with a total of 50 Khorne Berserkers in the list. 1 unit of 10 being led by Karn, as well as those 2 units of 20 on the battlefield being led by the Juggernaut Lords to give them bonus movement. So those guys are going to be moving a base 10 inches, in addition to the advance and charge that we can also get from Berserker Warbands, or the max distance Blood Surge moves that you can get from Berserker's Wrath. We then have 2 units of Exalted 8-Bound to trade into heavier vehicles, the stuff that the Khorne Berserkers have a tough time killing because of their relatively low strength attacks. However, once you get sustained and lethal hits in here, the Khorne Berserkers will often bury almost anything you hit with their absolute mass of attacks. We do have a single Rhino to transport Karn's unit around, a Jekyll unit for backline objective holding, and 3 units of Chaos Spawn just for utility. Now, the big benefits here, obviously, is that those Khorne Berserkers can go super fast, advancing and charging, getting reroll charges potentially, theoretically +1 to charge, as well as using Rage-Fueled Invigoration to access an enormous amount of combat maneuverability. You're going to be able to swing models in your Khorne Berserker units around almost anywhere on the battlefield using 6-inch Pile-In and Consolidate move. And with a unit as large as these Khorne Berserker squads are, with 21 total models, one of them being a large cavalry base, you're oftentimes going to be able to do a lot of charge and fight phase manipulation by basing enemies, blocking off your landing zones in contact with those enemies, and then using those enhanced Pile-In and Consolidates to combat slingshot characters or Eviscerator-equipped Khorne Berserkers around the battlefield to steal objectives, kill utility units, or even clip out multiple units at a time with these huge Khorne Berserker squads. Surviving until they get into those combats is always the tough part, but holding up Blood Surge movements and just the massive amount of movement that they're able to generate in this particular list allows them to get there regardless, especially if you're playing on relatively decent levels of terrain. Now with that, we're going to move on over to the Phoenix GT, which had 3 undefeated players. It was large enough and only ran 5 rounds to get multiple undefeated at the end. And starting with Justin Jansen, who ran Necrons in an Awakened Dynasty. Now, this list is pretty wild, focusing very heavily on a Silver Tide style of Necrons, taking a ton of Necron warriors, as well as Locust Lords to give the army some shooting punch. This includes a Catacomb Command Barge to project a +1 objective control aura, a Chronomancer to give a unit a double move, they're able to move after shooting, a Luminor Seraz to protect warriors with a Armor of Contempt effect, as well as give them bonus AP, in addition to Orican the Diviner to give one of those units a 4+ invulnerable save, the one that the Chronomancer is not attached to, and 2 Royal Wardens to allow the Necron warriors to fall back and still shoot. One of them equipped with Netherrealm Casket to give the unit stealth. This is a classic combination if you attach both Orican the Diviner and the Netherrealm Casket Warden into a single unit, because they can dual attach, with one being a Crypt Tech. The unit's going to gain stealth and a 4+ invulnerable save. If you're dealing with low AP enemies as well, then Luminor Seraz's ability is going to proc as well, so improving your survivability against low AP weapons. That makes this big brick of 20 Necron warriors almost impossible to deal with effectively. Even engaging it doesn't really help that much, because it's just going to fall back out of melee with you with the Royal Wardens, potentially reanimate models back onto objectives to take them, and then reposition itself to disrupt your scoring. We have a Ghost Arc for some additional reactive reanimation, a Canoptic Reanimator, 2 units of Cryptothralls to dual attach into those units as well, because they have attached Cryptex to give them even further model count and wound count, and to give you some high value models that can be reanimated back with all your reactive reanimations. A Canoptek Scarab Swarm, because we have a lot of Technomancers in the center of the battlefield, as well as 2 units of 6 Locust Destroyers. Those are both going to be joined by Locust Lords, one of them with a Veil of Darkness to give it some teleportation, alongside 2 units of Ophidian Destroyers, which will just do that innately by being an Ophidian Destroyer. So this gives you an absolutely insane amount of onboard presence. You have 40 Necron warriors running up the battlefield. You can string them back all the way to your Ghost Arcs, Reanimators, and Illuminor Seraz to give them all of those combined benefits, and then force your opponent to 1-tap the entire unit. If you don't, you can pull them out of line of sight thanks to casualties, and then reanimate them slowly back to objectives in order to maintain control of those objectives. And each of those Necron warriors is going to be objective control 3 thanks to the Catacomb Command Barge. So as long as the command module of Seraz, the Reanimator, the Ghost Arc, and the Command Barge are alive, and you're able to string the Necron Warrior unit to them, they're going to get so many bonuses that it's very difficult to interact with these squads. From there, we also have some maneuverability from those Locust Destroyers who can come out of reserve. We use the Veil of Darkness to get shots with 5-up critical lethal hits onto particularly relevant targets that could threaten the warrior bricks. And from there, you're just going to score out immense numbers of points. The army doesn't do an immense amount of damage. The Necron warriors will slowly attrition things, especially with Illuminor Seraz's +1 AP ability. However, you don't necessarily need it to. It will simply outscore most armies in the game. Now we're going to also move to Martin van der Most, who went 5-0 at the same event using Chaos Space Marines. And Martin was using a Chaos Cult in this case, very different detachment than we typically see out of Chaos Space Marines. This included Cypher, 3 Dark Communes, one with Warped Foresight for a 6-inch scout, one with Incendiary Goad for +1 strength or attacks based on the casualties the unit has taken, which you'll oftentimes take thanks to making desperate packs to take mortal wounds on your own unit as you move up the battlefield. The last one with Cultist's Brand to give reroll advance and charge rolls. Those guys are going to join into the 3 units of 16 Accursed Cultists in the army, and then we follow that up with an immense amount of scoring. We do have some shooting in the backline from 2 Predator Annihilators and 2 Predator Destructors, so the army is not bereft of hitting power, obviously besides those Accursed Cultist squads, but we then have 2 units of Raptors for utility and a grand total of 40 Chaos Cultists and 4 Cultist mobs of 10. Following that up is a Terminator Sorcerer who's going to be death hexing units in order to improve the AP characteristic of the Annihilators and the Destructors so that they can actually put some pretty serious long-range damage down. But from there, a lot of the pressure from the list comes from those Dark Communes. We have that scouting unit that's going to be able to move up early and pin the opponent back in their deployment zone to allow the other 2 units to stage, use all of the combined damage improvement abilities that Chaos Cult has to spike their damage absolutely through the roof and follow-up attack for immense amounts of damage, all the while you're being hit by these 4 Predators from long range. Once it gets down to it, you still have to deal with all of these cultists who are going to be obsecking those objectives that the Accursed Cultists have cleared, as well as the Raptors who are going to be scoring secondaries pretty consistently over the course of the game, making it a very good jail-style list that also has incredible scoring and a solid amount of ranged attacks backing it up. Now, we'll keep on the Chaos theme here with Bjorn Eriksson from the Grip Figurspel 2. Bjorn was running a Chaos Knight's Infernal Lance. And stop me if you've heard this before, but it contains 3 Knight Despoilers with a combined total of 6 Despoiler Gatling Cannons. What a shocker. These guys are going to be putting out 36 Strength 6 AP2 2 damage gunshots. If they don't hit up into T12 stuff, they're going to be wounding most of the game on 5s at worst and simply overloading their capacity to save with immense attack volume. We then have some objective holding from 3 War Dog Carnivores, as well as providing a little bit of melee, and then just a ton of utility from some allied Chaos Demons. This includes a Plague Bearer unit, so we can obsec our home objective, 3 Nurgling Swarms to unlock some additional non-battle line slots, as well as 3 Beasts of Nurgle. The Knight Despoilers have been putting in work since the release of the new Chaos Knights Codex. The ability to gain sustained or lethal hits from Malefic Surges, as well as ignore cover for their relatively mediocre AP weapons, is a match made in heaven. Also, being able to improve their movement characteristic with Malefic Surges in the movement phase and allowing them to then pass through walls and get angles of fire that you wouldn't normally expect means that these Despoilers will almost always get a shot that's relevant. And as long as you're just peeling away your opponent and pulling focus from the War Dog Carnivores and the annoying Beasts of Nurgle that are running over all of the objectives, the army's going to do pretty well. Now, if we're discussing armies that could potentially answer this Knight Menace, let's talk about the Septembro Open Almyram, which was won by Alexis Bunrat running a Warhost. Now, Warhost has been touted as the classic answer to these big, super heavy builds, especially focusing on Fire Dragon units, and that's exactly what Alexis brought in this case. We've seen a lot of success from Warhost, and now that the Swooping Hawk Aeldari build has been nerfed slightly, it's likely that we'll see more Warhost lists in the future rather than less. In this case, Alexis is running Eldrad Ulthran to give additional command points so that you can fuel the Fire and Fade abilities on turn 1. You do need kind of 2 CP per battle round at least to fuel all of your units jumping in and out of transports with the combination of Fire and Fade and Skyborn Sanctuary. And so if you don't have Eldrad, it can be really awkward in the early game since you may leave the units stranded outside of your vehicles. We then have Flagon to buff your Fire Dragons, Janezar, and Lycus for some disruption and some additional critical hit buffing. We have 1 unit of Corsair Void Reavers, a Storm Guardian squad to obsec the backline objective and potentially provide a bunker for Eldrad Ulthran to jump into, since oftentimes he will be by himself and susceptible to indirect fire. We then have 2 units of 10 Fire Dragon. So we're not running any of the alternative ranged attackers coming out of Falcons, things like Dark Reaper squads with Maugan-Ra. Instead, we're just going to be running a bunch of Fire Dragons in Wave Serpents. There are 2 Wave Serpents to embark those Fire Dragons into, a unit of Howling Banshees for Janezar to join with, some utility provided by 3 units of Swooping Hawks, as well as a unit of Rangers, 3 units of Warp Spiders, one of them equipped with melee weapons on the Exarch, a Power Blade Array to join with Lycus, the other 2 just equipped with their normal Death Weavers and Spinneret Rifles. in order to perform utility functions and clear out enemy infantry. As long as you don't hit something that can either like wrap and destroy the Wave Serpents while being able to access the units inside, especially things that can one-shot the Wave Serpent reliably, that don't give it an opportunity to fade away out of threat range to allow it to then disembark its units. And it fights armies that want to engage it in a straight-up fight, putting big heavy things into the center of the table, which are just fodder for Fire Dragon units to kill. This army is always going to be very effective, although it does get more and more matchup dependent as the Aeldari star slowly falls. Now with that, we're going to move over to the Autumn Swordwind GT. This event was won by Chris Irvine, going 5-0 with Death Guard in a Virulent Victorium, the objective control focused detachment for Death Guard. In this case, Chris was running a Demon Prince of Nurgle with Revolting Regeneration to give him a 5+ Feel No Pain, make him extremely difficult to take down, so he can continuously provide you with free stratagems over the course of the entire game, as well as a pair of Lords of Contagion, one of them with Furnace of Plagues for additional strength and attacks on his already impressively standed big giant axe. We then have a Malignant Plaguecaster and a Tallyman. The Plaguecaster and the Biologous Putrefier are going to hop into a 10-model unit of Plague Marines to do some absolutely disgusting damage in close range, being delivered by a Chaos Rhino. We have 2 units of 3 Death Shroud Terminators to attach in with the Lords of Contagion, alongside 3 heavy Blight Launcher Blow Drones, 2 Myphitic Blight Haulers, and 3 units of 10 Poxwalkers to obsec the objectives in the center of the table from the early game. So far, normal Virulent Victorium stuff. Nothing that we haven't really seen a bunch of times before, but that's not too surprising, given the fact that this detachment is undoubtedly effective and continues to put up results even after Death Guard had been nerfed. Now with that, we're going to move over to the Orchard of Oh No, an event that was won by Cass Kylie Burke running Hallowed Martyrs. This is the Adepta Sororitas detachment that gives you additional bonuses when you lose bottles from your units and has the ability to respawn your characters when they die, very important. In this case, we were taking Junith Eruita to give us some command point generation in the early game, a Canoness with Saintly Example, so a utility Canoness who can die and grant some additional miracle dice when she dies. Those Canonesses obviously as well have a 2+ invulnerable save once per game, so they can sort of run out, apply their Shadow Field effect to make themselves almost impossible to kill, complete some secondaries, and disincentivize your opponent from attacking them. If they survive, they just get to do the same thing again. If they die, they'll gain you miracle dice, and then you'll use Divine Intervention to respawn them, and then do it again anyway, generating yourself an enormous number of miracle dice because they'll pinata out for some resources each time they are destroyed. We then also have a Canoness with Jump Pack with Through Suffering Strength. I've talked about this combination in the past. This Canoness goes absolutely insane when you activate her own special ability for additional attacks once per game, but if you ever trigger the Through Suffering Strength enhanced mode, where the character has taken damage, getting even more bonus damage, and activating full wound rerolls thanks to Righteous Vengeance. We then have a Palatine with no enhancements, as well as a Hospitaller. Following that up, we have a unit of 3 Arcoflagellants for utility, a Celestian Sacrosanct unit of 10 that's going to be attaching with that Hospitaller to gain a Feel No Pain and regenerate some models. We have a Dominion squad with Flamethrower, so a little bit of forward operation and some infantry sweeping, a Retributor squad, all with multi-meltas, 1 single Seraphim squad with 2 sets of Hand Flamers, a Sister Novitiate squad, a Zephyrim squad that's likely to attach with that Jump Pack Canoness to allow her to benefit from the sustained lethal hits that the Zephyrim get. 2 Immolators to combat squad out the Dominions as well as the Sister Novitiates. It's likely that we see the Palatine join in with the Novitiate squad to deliver her to the fight. Some long-range shooting provided by 2 Castigators with autocannons, a single Mortifier, and a unit of Paragon Warsuits to attach in with Morven Vol. A little bit more of a combined arms approach than we've seen from many recent Sisters armies, which are focusing either very heavily on the sort of more aggressive gun units like Dominions and Retributors, or on the more melee units like Celestian Sacrosancts. This one kind of threads the needle between the two and completes those combos with all the very powerful character synergies that Hallowed Martyrs allows. Now with that, let's move over to one of the most improved armies from the new update, that being Adeptus Mechanicus from the major level event Invasion 2025. This event was won by Keitel Andre Lickness, who took it down using a Halo Screed Battleclade. This is the Grosmus detachment that allows you to improve the stats of up to 2 of your units by granting them Halo Override for additional movement, toughness, the ability to advance and charge, or stealth. Now, this is also using the new and improved Belisarius Call, who now can choose an enemy unit on the battlefield and give your army hit rerolls against it as one of his command phase leadership abilities. We're running 2 units of Skitarii Rangers, as well as Call and a Tech Priest Manipulus with Sanctified Ordnance for additional range and rerolls on hazardous checks. That Manipulus is going to be hopping into a unit of Corpuscari Electro Priest. It's been a while since we've seen these guys on the battlefield, but the big benefit that they get in Halo Scream Battleclad is the ability to use Targeting Override to get 5+ critical hits. They have a Tesla-style lightning weapon, giving them sustained hits too, so triggering that effect on a 5+ is huge. In addition, the Manipulus is also going to be granting the unit lethal hits thanks to his Galvanic Field Leadership ability, so this unit is going to be firing at a baseline 30 shots with 5+ critical, sustained, and lethal. If you target Belisarius Call's quote-unquote Oath of Moment target, you get full rerolls on that whole effect, making this basically better than a Fire Discipline combo than we've seen in the past, since this unit has enhanced sustained hits. Now that said, the attacks are only Strength 5 AP 0, but you're going to be forcing so many saves on most targets, especially if you're winning them on 5s, so if they're T9 or lower, that you will simply overload the save characteristic of most things you're shooting at. In this case, it's likely that you're handing your opponent somewhere, assuming you're rerolling your hit rolls, around 15 to 18 regular saving throws, and then also going ahead and rolling another somewhere around 40 normal wound rolls, which could be as many as another 15 wounds. Basically wounding your opponent somewhere around 30 times with this unit, not including the Manipulus's weapons at all. Now, the downside of the Corpuscari Electro Priest is that their range characteristic tends to be low. However, Sanctified Ordnance gets around that by giving them an additional 6 inches of range. Now, it's not a ton, but it's not too bad, and especially when you combine it with something like Conqueror Imperative to give them assault, they can actually get some pretty solid maneuverability. We also have a couple Scorpius Dune Riders to give them fire supports for wound rerolls, which I imagine we're also using, meaning that those sustained hits from these Corpuscari Electro Priests have a pretty high chance of converting into wounds on many targets as well. This combination is amazing. I'm so glad that it's seeing some play now that we're getting hit rerolls in the faction, because I was hoping that it would be good at the start, but it just turns out that Sanctified Ordnance and most of those benefits were better on Cataphrons. But now that you can combine a bunch of critical effects with enhanced criticals and rerolls, this little unit for only only 200 points can do an ungodly amount of damage. We then have a unit of Taraxi Skystalkers for utility, 2 units of Sicarian Infiltrators, a unit of 5 and a unit of 10 to absolutely dominate the middle of the table, 3 units of Sicarian Rust Stalkers for some melee punch. Big benefit here is that these guys are going to get the opportunity to advance and charge, which means they can double dip on their +2 to advance and charge rolls datasheet ability when they're nearby battle line units. As I mentioned before, we have 2 Scorpius Dune Riders, so we're able to deliver those Corpuscari Electro Priests, as well as likely some of the Sicarian Rust Stalkers or a Skitarii Ranger unit in the early game, and then following that up with some massive backline shooting, including 2 Scorpius Disintegrators with Ferromite cannons, as well as a unit of 3 newly improved Iron Strider Ballistari with their new 2-shot twin-linked Cognis las cannons. Again, these guys can potentially gain hit rerolls targeting the Oath of Moment target if Call has selected that ability, giving them full hit and wound rerolls and sustained hits 1 on those weapons, making them very high efficiency, high damage anti-tank shooting. Super cool to see Adeptus Mechanicus doing well. I do think that the changes to the faction have been very positive, and we've been seeing a lot of success from them. Doesn't seem like they are over the top or crazy broken, but the reroll hits from Belisarius Call not only makes that character much more palatable as an inclusion in most armies, but also means that you can do things like these crazy Corpuscari combos that were really unavailable to the faction previously, and definitely not particularly efficient when compared to similar combinations from other factions. Next up, let's talk about Tyranids. At the Amona GT Volume 4, Lucas Woback went undefeated at 5-0 with a Subterranean Assault Detachment. And this detachment was very infantry-focused, a lot different than we've seen similar Subterranean assaults in the past. This includes a Hive Tyrant, a Neurotyrant, and a Trigon with Trigon Prime as the only characters. However, that Neurotyrant is going to be important because we have 2 units of Zoanthropes in the list. So one of them gets to be joined by the Neurotyrant, gets +1 to hit. Now, the big downside of Subterranean Assault with these units is that oftentimes you have to trade them in for your opponent's heavy armor. There's a chance that they don't do enough damage, they don't kill what they target, and their defensive characteristics are so astronomically poor that they will likely just get picked up immediately on the crackback. However, the second unit can give you a little bit of redundancy and allow you to potentially 2-for-1 yourself, essentially put 2 Zoanthropes into a single target, ensure you kill it, and try to threat overload what your opponent's able to hit back. Now, in addition to that, we're also bringing a bunch of utility. We have a Biovore unit, 2 Lictors to hold down the midboard and clear out enemy screens, which is always important for Subterranean Assault, alongside a Gargoyle unit and a Termagant squad. Now, the Termagants are good for backline objective holding and general utility functions. However, the Gargoyles are important in this detachment because they are basically automatically allowed to steal enemy objectives. You can place them 6 inches away from enemies when they come out of deep strike from a tunnel network. They fly out of the holes in the ground. I'm not entirely sure how that works, but I guess it does. And after shooting, they're able to move 6 inches, and they're objective control too, so they're good at taking objectives. That means essentially that they get to be outside engagement range of their screening unit. You start 6 inches away and then move 6 inches after attacking. So without charging or allowing your opponent to counterattack, heroically intervene, interrupt, any of that stuff, Overwatch, the Gargoyles can just appear and then show up on the objective and just take it away. And so as long as you're not entirely bubbling out the objective with your engagement range, the Gargoyles are going to be able to disrupt your scoring. Now, those are being delivered by a Ravener squad to build tunnels in the backline, as well as a pair of Molochs. Now, the nice thing about the Molochs is that they are tunnelers, so you get to target both Molochs for potentially 0 command points with their stratagem to go back into reserve. That allows the Molochs, as long as they set up 9 inches away from enemies, to constantly be pulsing their mortal wound effect every turn of the game, as long as they're being fueled by the Hive Tyrant, because the Hive Tyrant can allow both of them to go back into reserve, and those guys then generate value passively over the course, because they're constantly going to be battle-striking enemies and forcing mortal wounds onto them. Now, in addition to that, we also have some melee punch from a unit of melee bioweapon Tyranid warriors. Those guys obviously do some pretty significant damage. You can use the stratagem Inflating Emergence to give them sustained hits, even in melee as well, which is an effect that they love to have because they have huge high-volume attacks with hit rerolls baked in from their own sort of combat stance abilities, and they are a relatively efficient trading unit. There's 2 Exocrids as well, I should mention, to do some backline shooting. Relying very heavily on the combination of the Zoanthropes and the Exocrids to do our heavy lifting, but in addition to that, we have a lot of sort of sustained attritional damage from the Molochs, and we can hammer blow enemies down with the Warriors or the Trigon if we need to in melee. Very different style of Subterranean Assault build than we've seen in the past. Usually we see these builds more and more commonly get focused on the heavy monsters. Things like Norn Emissaries, things like Tyrannofexes, these big, huge, stompy things that want to get delivered to an objective and then sit on that objective for a really long time. This army is way more finesse-oriented. We have these sort of lighter infantry units that can potentially generate value if they cut fine lines of sight around the terrain features. Now, especially if you have a lot of terrain on the table, the Zoanthropes do tend to get better because they are more protected. They actually just want to attack enemies that are relatively close to them. Their range isn't phenomenally long. However, if they engage in a gunfight at a long distance, they will just get killed immediately by opponents shooting. So if they can get line of sight to like one enemy model, for example, trace a really fine line and then shoot that model while being relatively protected from the rest of your opponent's army, we can potentially reuse those squads. And I think that's what this army's trying to do. And then from there, we can generate a lot of damage from the Molochs just by bouncing up and down and constantly doing mortals. And then we have a little bit of sort of counterpunch in the late game. So very cool to see a bit of an evolution of the Subterranean Assault build, no pun intended. And with that, we are going to move over to the NordCon GT. I've saved the best for last here because Niklas Schmidt went 5-0 at this event with Chaos Demons. And the reason that I say that this is the best for last is that this is a list after my own heart, evidenced by the fact that I made a 1-hour-long video talking about me playing this exact list over 9 games of Warhammer 40k. Not that I'm going to take credit for the list, though. It's literally 8 units. It's not a particularly difficult list to engineer. I also have a supporter video available for Advanced Tactics members on my channel, talking in depth about this list, the matchups that it wants to play, and the way that it will typically resolve games. Like me, the list is incredibly simple. It includes 6 Greater Demons and 11 Plague Bearers. This includes Be'lakor, a Bloodthirster with Argath, the King of Blades, Scarbrand, Rodigus, the Lord of Change with the Everstave, and a Great Unclean One with the Endless Gift. That's followed up by a Sloppity Bile Piper and a unit of Plague Bearers. The Plague Bearers are good to hold down your backline. The Bile Piper does not attach with them typically. He deep strikes in, performs an action, and then is murdered brutally by your opponent. Meanwhile, Be'lakor acts as an aircraft carrier, protecting his charges as they orbit him up the battlefield, repositioning him in the Lord of Change to clear out enemy screens before setting up a position where it can absolutely dominate the middle of the table by dumping enormous greater demons onto objectives and hopefully overwhelming your opponent's ability to deal with it. It is susceptible to fixed secondaries, but I will say that once the Imperial Knight Codex ticks over to the new version, I do think that one of the big predators of this army, that being Mass Skyfire Protocol Armiger Helvrins, now that Skyfire ability is gone, is actually going to be removed from the metagame, which I do think makes armies like this much better. The downside is that anti-fly 2+ weapons are particularly lethal against winged greater demons, so things like Be'lakor, the Lord of Change, and the Bloodthirster, and basically allowed armies like Imperial Knights that use those models to pick up those demons for free, which meant that you were basically playing 2 to 3 greater demons down in that matchup, which made it incredibly difficult to win. Now that ability's gone, I do think that this army actually plays into a variety of matchups pretty well. You just have to dodge like Eldar and a couple of Space Marine builds, and then otherwise a lot of armies in the metagame right now don't have the beef to deal with the beef that it's bringing. Absolutely love that this army's getting a little bit more love because I am a huge fan of degenerate skew lists running nothing but huge stompy monsters. So congratulations to Niklas for taking down the GT with that one. And with that, that is all the best armies of Warhammer 40k for this video. Thanks for watching all the way to the end of the video. Huge thanks as well to Carnage Con for sponsoring. Please go check them out at the links in the video description. Having attended the convention in the past personally, I can attest that it is an incredibly laid-back atmosphere in amongst beautiful scenery with a bunch of chill people. And what more could you ask for with a gaming convention? And with that, I'm going to go ahead and wrap things up. Thanks to everybody who supports Tactical Tortoise, whether that's over on Patreon at patreon.com/TacticalTortoise, YouTube channel members, and Twitch subscribers. All you people are amazing. And I love you. Remember to keep it classy, folks, and have happy wargaming.